another segment of Tendaji Talk, Neighborhood Without Borders, which I think is very important and telling in the times that we're living in and the current political and social climate that we're living in, that we really push neighborhoods without borders, communities without borders, and bridge the gap and create relationships with people regardless of their background. You know, we're all here on this planet together, and it would be nice to actually support one another and live in harmony for a change instead of, what we have today and what we've been having. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing panelists today. We have Devin and Nikhil Mukamala, and they are recent graduates from Powers Catholic, and amazing folks. I was actually able to initially meet them at the end of March of this year when they organized the March for Our Lives rally, protest, speaking initiative at U of M Flint's Wilson Park. So I would like to introduce them. Thank you both for being on the panel and agreeing to be here and speak with us and share your perspectives with us. And they just graduated, so can we get a round of applause for them, Thank you. And we have, Keyshawn was here last time. And last week he was at the panel discussion, and he spoke as well at the 4-year commemoration of the Flint water crisis, that we had a special rally and protest, just demonstration outside of the Flint City Hall. So thank you again for coming and being here. So what we're gonna talk about today is really trying to get a feel of what are young people thinking and doing when it comes to voting, social justice, activism, their lives, and getting their perspectives and opinions and thoughts out there. But we also want to make this an intimate conversation with everyone, because again, it's neighborhoods without borders. We're building community and building relationships. So we want everyone to participate if they want to. It is your choice, your decision. We're not gonna, force people. But if you would like to, please join in the conversation. And add your thoughts and perspectives. But I have a list of questions. We may not get through all of them because we do want everyone to participate if they want to. But the first question is if you could give us some more background about you. When we first started, you were telling me about what schools and programs you're going to. And so if we could get some more information, like let other people get to know you.
Yeah. So my name is Devin Mukamala. I just graduated from Powers this past year. I'm going to be studying economics and public policy at the University of Chicago. I was really drawn into politics with before the last presidential election, as I began to learn more about what politics was and how it affected me personally. I think that's something that all of us have come to know in great detail this past year. So I'm going to be pursuing public policy and economics with the intent of eventually running for elected office, maybe in the city of Flint, probably in the city of Flint, and eventually I'll try to make it to the legislature or someplace where I can influence public policy directly.
My name is Nikhil Mukamala. We're twins. I also just graduated, and I'll be pursuing my master's in biomedical engineering at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Politics for me was more about social issues from the get-go. I had the opportunity of seeing an interesting sample of kids at my Catholic high school. Being in Flint, which has been a great experience for me, I see such a dynamic of people and such diversity in their community. And being in a high school that was private and geared towards some of the more parochial schools as opposed to public schools, I just had a great opportunity to meet a lot of people throughout my life. And social issues for me were something that I think are less partisan. I think it's something that's more of a person-to-person interaction, and I always believe that politics should be personable, and I think that you can influence someone just as much talking to them one-on-one as you can being on TV, talking to a nation, and I just really enjoy social issues, and I think it boils down to ethics and everything in between. I hope to, in biomedical engineering, give my own perspective on ethics and what I believe should be in the future of science in America.
Thank you. My next question, since we're talking about social justice issues or social issues in period, what are some of the social issues that are dear to you or that really moves you and that you want to work to improve?
Well, I'm more of an economics as it
Mhm.
relates to social issues, so I like discussing the ethics behind subprime mortgages, school choice, just equitable public policy is kind of my forte. So one thing that I've been really interested in researching is the concept of school choice and creating a marketplace that incentivizes education and gives equal access to education. So that's something very dear to me. I participated in the American Legion Boys Nation program, which was a mock government program. 2 kids from every state are selected to participate in Washington, D.C. We were on a mock Senate so we could pass legislation, and we were invited to the White House so we got to talk with the president. And so while I was there, I really pushed the issue of torture. And that's been another one that's been with me since I started my career in politics, I guess. But I'm really an advocate for hampering down on torture and removing and destroying CIA black sites across the world. And then on the community level, I'm really interested in a lot of regressive public policy that some of our legislators have been introducing, like voter ID and Medicaid work requirements.
Thank you for letting us know.
I think for me, something that's always been very personal to me is just the issue of racism. And to me, it's more that when you talk to someone and they say, oh, I'm not racist, and they think that that means that because they don't directly degrade another human being of a different race, that makes them not racist because they don't participate in those things. But I always see racism as more of when I see people look at people of another race and just inherently think things about them, and racism is more of a construct, and I think that that's always perpetuated by certain systems and institutions that we have in place. And I think that beyond the politics of it, there's always something that's more human. And when you talk to people, you really get a sense of, are they racist in the sense that they believe certain things and that's inherent to them? And sometimes people don't like to point fingers and say, well, that's just how these people were raised, that's just how this generation grew up. I think that when we need to perpetuate the existence of harmony and get rid of racism in the sense that the younger generation can't always just be held accountable as, well, when these kids grow up, racism will be gone. I think we need to start now and look at the fact that racism can be eliminated by having open conversations like this and being able to say that you can't put certain expectations on a group of people, or say that this race of people has always been lazy in our country, or say that these immigrants are taking our jobs when the jobs might be for everyone, or you believe that immigrants are something other than U.S. citizens, especially when they're legal. I think that it all boils down to just our own humanity, and like you said, we're all going to be on this earth, we might as well work together, and I think that social issues like that really strike a chord with me.
Thank you both. Thank you. So I initially met them when they did the March for Our Lives. They organized the rally here, and they organized with other, students and youth in the community. So looking at gun violence and then discussing structural issues, economic issues, and how race and other social identities that are social constructs play a role in who is checked for gun violence and who has security and metal detectors in their schools and who doesn't. When you all were organizing that, and starting your political career and your educational career, how did you go about organizing the rally? And what were some of your key points when fighting for gun safety and, common sense gun reform to protect people and save lives?
Yeah, so when Nikhil and I were discussing the March for Our Lives, one thing that we knew we needed to have was accountability for our legislators. Because we're not the ones who are in the chamber making legislation, it's our representatives. So what we decided was we would try to have speakers, but also questions from the community. And so I think that was probably the most important part for the rally. It's kind of what we centered it on, is the community being able to hold our legislators accountable. We had Rep. Neely, Senate Minority Leader Ananek, and Congressman Kildee all come and speak. They all gave very impassioned speeches. Then we had questions that we would funnel from the community to the representatives. And then we also had an opportunity for the community to talk to itself. So we had people able to go up and speak on the podium and say their piece about gun violence. So that was what we wanted to center the event on. And when we talk about common sense gun reform, I think one of the other goals that we had was to try and bridge the partisan gap and reach public policy solutions that both parties could get behind. So with that in mind, we talked about stuff like Fix NICS, which passed in the budget bill. I had a discussion about red flags with a red kid from Lapeer. We talked about just all sorts of common sense policy that a number of senators on both sides could get behind. I know Marco Rubio supported the red flags, as well as I think it was Dick Durbin. But yeah, so we tried to bridge the partisan gap and hold our legislators accountable. Those are the two main goals.
I think another part of that was looking at the aftermath of the Parkland shooting. Just the youth getting involved was just so powerful for us, and we figured that we had to do something, even if it wasn't, the big march that's happening in DC or in any of the big cities. Having something personal in Flint is just as powerful to the community. And a part of that was we reached out to a lot of the public high schools around the county, and we wanted students to come. And something that was just very impactful, and I will never forget, is having students come up there and talk to the community and say that I go to school and I'm afraid after I hear on the news about all these shootings, and that I go to school afraid and I go home afraid to go to school. It's so many kids say the same things, and I think it's so psychologically damaging that in our society our kids go to school where they're supposed to learn and feel safe, feel protected, feel like they have a voice, and they go there and feel like no matter what they do, they'll still be so powerless and still be so afraid. And it was so impactful to have high school students be up there, be able to look the politicians in the eyes and say, this is a real issue for me. And kind of we're talking about here, them saying that I can't vote on this yet, but school shootings are an issue that directly affects me and not necessarily affects you, and what are you going to do for it? And I think it was helpful for them and reassuring to hear, like Devin said, just the impassioned speeches. And I remember Rep. Kildee getting up there and showing his grade from the NRA was an F. And it was just helpful to see that the adults and the people, not necessarily the voters, but the people in the legislative chambers are standing with us. And it's helpful to not see them on TV or hear about them on their social media, but to look them in the eye and have them say to you that we are fighting for you and we're standing with you. And I really hope that the kids that were there left with a sense of empowerment and know that their voices were heard and that it really mattered to be there.
Thank you. Going with that as well, getting young people out, that's the big discussion, is if we could just get the millennials and the younger folks and the late Gen Xers to vote, then we're gonna, be able to, I always hear get the blue wave or whatever wave they're trying to push. So among your peers and among the people you associate with, are people talking about voting or running for office as you are in the future?
Yeah, so I think after this presidential election, which has kind of pushed both sides to hyper-partisanship, I think a lot more people are getting involved with politics, not in the ways that I would think are most productive, because I think it's a lot of, like I said, hyper-partisanship, which is not good. It's more detrimental than it is effective. But I think the reason why millennials haven't been voting is because they have no reason to believe that their vote matters. So an important thing that we should be doing as a community, and that I think is happening incrementally now since the presidential election, is voters are now getting enfranchised, and with a lot of populism that's occurring amongst the candidates, they feel like their vote matters, and they feel like they need a candidate that they can get behind, and that ties in again to accountability. They have reason to believe that their legislators are working for them. So I think that, especially March for Our Lives, the rally that we had, was really good for people of my generation to interact with legislators instead of seeing them as some sort of independent body, because I think government is supposed to be something that's for the people, right? And I think that if you have independent legislators who don't interact with the community, it's a serious problem because there's a disconnect that only fosters anti-establishmentarianism, which leads to resentment of the political process. So I think that the rally was a great thing that really pushed people of my generation to have faith in politics. I know it restored faith in politics for me when it seemed like no one was listening. I gave a lot of people a voice, and I think that that's what we need to do if we want to enfranchise the millennial voter base.
Thank you.
Back to the question just about the peers and the people I interact with. I think it was very interesting after the 2016 election, just seeing candidates from both parties on screen during the debates, just bickering, going back and forth, and focusing less on the issues and more about personal attacks. I feel like that really played off, and I think it did feed into the political scene that was happening in young people. Because I saw so many people supporting a candidate or disavowing another candidate just based on their history or their looks or whatever it may be, and just stop focusing on the issues. And I think that does take away from the credibility of young people a little bit. And I think you can only go so many times with talking to an adult, an older person. They say, well, why should I listen to a 16 or 17-year-old anyways? You have no real world experience. And it only happens so many times before people start to feel like they're not ready or they won't be respected in politics. And after this election, I think that encourage people on both sides, whether what your political views may be, just to get involved and do some more research. That way the next time you go and you talk to an adult in your community or one of your family members at Thanksgiving or Christmas, you have sort of the credibility and the knowledge from whatever research you've been doing or what's important to you. I think there really was a push for, this is what I believe and I want to know why I believe it. And I want to know what I can do to make sure that the beliefs and the things that I want for my community can happen. And be it on a local level or a federal level, I think that the urge to vote for a lot of my friends especially was very high. And first thing I did when I turned 18 this summer was register to vote, and I got it going and I told my friends. A couple of my friends now are organizing registering to vote like drives locally, the farmers market, and a couple other things. And I think there's just such a movement now. We want our voices to matter because we're educated, and as we grow, we want to know more about politics. We want to know what we can do to make the most difference.
Thank you. I think, again, great responses. Thanks to everyone for joining us. We're on Facebook Live, and then thank you for coming out and filming and everyone being here. Eventually, we are going to open up to have more of a dialogue between everybody here who would like to participate. So one more question before we get into that is, again, looking at how we can get, young folks involved, not only just, no, that's the question. Is voting the only, answer to solving these issues, or do you think there's multiple ways that we can move to progress in solving issues in our communities, neighborhoods, country, and world at large?
Yeah, so voting is just one way to impact your community. I mean, I think more important than voting, and I'm going to be careful about this, is understanding community issues and what you're voting for. It's all well and good if everyone votes, but if people vote and they don't know why they're voting, then all of a sudden when the problems perpetuate, then people are asking the question, does voting even matter? And so I think what's important is we challenge each other to free ourselves of echo chambers, and we start a sound discourse on almost every policy issue. We re-examine and try to shed our partisan ties and try and bridge the gap in a lot of areas that can be bridged. That means welcoming policy that we hadn't really considered, challenging policy that we have. I think that voting is definitely important, and more people need to vote, obviously. But I think a huge problem is people not voting with their minds, people voting with their hearts, which is a blessing and a curse, because you have a lot of really impassioned people, but a lot of really tunnel vision people. And so I think voter education is the most important. A vote that is made without education is not a vote at all, because it doesn't really seek to address problems, it seeks to address egos. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we can enfranchise the voter base by pushing them to learn, they can get involved with the community outside of just voting. I mean, there's community development projects that a lot of people can volunteer for. People can go to the soup kitchen. People can sit down and have a discourse in a community theater about problems like we're doing right now. If there's a discourse about community issues, then the community can solve those issues without relying on a legislator. So I mean, if we can unite together behind ourselves, we can solve a lot of the problems that we didn't think we could solve. And then for those that we can't solve, if we call upon a legislator to do it, they can do it because we have accountability.
Thank you.
I think going back to one of the last things that Devin hit on is just that politics is not the only way that we're going to make the world and our community a better place. And while voting is all well and good, to a certain extent, there are things in the community, there are problems that can be solved through educated people fulfilling what they believe is their life's purpose, right? Whether it be politics or being the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers. I think that we need to focus on the future, whether that be voting for the future, preparing young people for the future, or making sure that the adults right now are focusing on the future and the world that they're going to be leaving for the next generation. And I think that, again, it doesn't have to be through politics. I think that comes down to infrastructure and education, through people revitalizing the community, through participating and being involved. And like we said, getting involved here just with the local discourse is one thing. When you look at what we did with the March for Our Lives, that was a great discussion. And you look at the kids, like I said, from Parkland and the movement they started across the country. And that 1 month, the fire that surrounded, after the massacre, that surrounded the whole gun rights and that whole issue is just amazing to me. Everything that started was from something terrible, but the kids are so empowered, and it just blows my mind that kids my own age can do something on that like grand of a scale at the national level, organize high schoolers from Florida, got my brother and I to get out there and host a march, people around the country to host a march. I think that, you know, it's all about preparing us for the future. And as statistics are changing and traditions might be changing, we just have to focus on what's the best for our country now, what's the best for our world now. And I think that part of that is preparing the next generation for what they're going to have to deal with.
Thank you. I think that is, you know, again, as we talk about neighborhoods without borders, what about politics without political parties dominating and people actually being a part of it? Because I really appreciate that, because that's one thing I have noticed is that, you know, and this is an ongoing issue, but there's a lot of polarization, but yet so many of us have so much more in common, and yet we're constantly fighting each other, and then like we're not solving any of our issues. So I do want to open this up now to be a more intimate discussion for those who want to participate. And let's like have a communication in the community here in the theater. So just if anyone wants to raise their hand or just speak, what are some questions or concerns or things that are on your thought, that's on your mind as we talk about young folks voting, adults, middle age, older people, community? What are some things that are running through your mind that we could discuss as together?
I'm just wondering, you've mentioned the polarization and the echo chambers. Do you see that among young people, or do you think that maybe the younger generation coming up is a little more open-minded?
So I would say that I've seen echo chambers in adults as much as I've seen echo chambers in my generation, as much as I would hate to admit it. I think that what this election has done is really accelerate that, because I began to see friends that I've known all my life kind of change, at first subtly, and then now it's indistinguishable because of how their family socialization has kind of socialized these preconceptions that were kind of tucked away and then brought out to the surface as the rift became more visible. I think echo chambers are a huge problem. I think we need to commit to open discourse. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't just end in a generation. Like, just being born in a different generation doesn't free one from their own socialization. So I think that it's gonna be hard, because we're gonna have to make concessions. We're gonna have to shut our preconceptions and look at things in ways that we've never looked at them before. But I think that we need to do it hands-on as a community and as a society, kind of re-examine and look at ourselves. And we're gonna have to change. I think that without us actively making the effort to change, we're not gonna be able to get rid of the echo chamber. And it's just gonna perpetuate unless we do something specifically about it.
If I would add to that, as far as the polarization goes, amongst the people I've seen, young people in my own school and just in the community, I think that there's a certain aspect of seeing people on TV, whether they be politicians or any authority figures, when someone that you see, people you look up to, so whether it be your parents or your family or teachers, when you see politicians, for example, who in their own words seem to condone behaviors that we never thought were acceptable on TV or, you know, in our own communities, it's hard sometimes for younger people to see that and say, well, if my parents look up to this authority figure and he's shedding whatever we thought was okay for the behavior of politicians, for example, that maybe it's okay in my own discourse to believe some of these policies that were thought to be a little extreme or things that you might want to keep to yourself. And I feel like there's so much, like just so much more vocal now about things that when we would used to like talk about politics and always be, you know, calm and civil. And like I said in a previous question, watching on TV, just people pick each other apart instead of focusing on the issues, it was just a little bit abhorrent to me to see that. And I think that just all trickles down into our younger generations, because I see people who've been friends all their life would never look at each other any differently and just tear each other apart about politics. And sometimes it's things they understand and there's issues that they don't respect people for believing. But other times it's just, oh, your family or you believe in this policy or you respect this politician, my family doesn't. And because of that, like I will always belittle you, or whenever I see you, I can't stop thinking about that fact. And I think there has to come a time where we have to separate ourselves and our persons and our relationships from politics. And for me, that was something that I really had to learn after this most recent presidential election, there were people all my life who I respected, and it was hard for me to not look at them differently because they were on the other side of the aisle or they supported a candidate who I didn't. And I definitely learned a lot being involved with younger people who have political views that oppose my own. And I think that as far as polarization goes, be that as it may, we can still move past it and connect with each other and have discourses and still be civil. I think we can get back to the politics that we put on a pedestal so highly and we respected. And as far as politicians go, I think that that's an example that needs to be set on every single level of politics about just the respect and the civility of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts, questions?
I agree that we need an educated electorate, whatever age we are. We need to know what the issues are and basically what we're talking about with our vote, right? The State Department of Education was reported to be changing the standards for social studies and reducing the number of mentions of certain groups, like I think Arab Americans maybe. They're not going to talk about the Ku Klux Klan. By the way, we have a Klan presence in the state, but we don't hear much about them. Anyway, my question for you is, what would you think would be an appropriate curriculum for social studies from the viewpoint of what we used to call civics? What recommendations for topics, people to include would you make?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we would try to cut out Arab American history or the history of the Klan in the United States from social studies. I'm definitely against that. I think that one of the things that I think my generation and generations previous have missed out on when discussing civics is how to have discourse on sensitive issues. I think how to have discourse is something that we've never learned, and because this election has been so cut down the middle, that lack of skill and lack of ability amongst most people has really damaged relationships and done a lot to further the rift. So in my civics class, we had the pleasure of having a teacher who I got to talk with outside of class who challenged the way that I think. And so that was something that I had for myself that I wish everyone in my class and everyone in my school could have. So I think as our culture needs to shift towards not shying away from sensitive issues until it's too late, but discussing sensitive issues and discussing how to discuss sensitive issues. So in every civics class and every government class, there needs to be discourse. I'm not going to give a curriculum per se, but I mean maybe a weekly discussion or a monthly discussion on a certain public policy from, I don't know, 6th grade. I feel like that would be a good kind of benchmark because one's already been educated on the system of government in 5th grade and in years previous. If we commit to having a monthly discussion on a policy to hear both sides of the story, I know that elected officials are always excited to talk about policy. They could come into schools. I know Brianna McGarry, she's the health policy aide for Senator Ananick, came to my old elementary school, St. John Vianney, to talk about government. She's amazing when it comes to health policy. I still communicate with her. She's very, very educated and very polite about discussing it. I know she would definitely commit to something like that. I know a lot of other representatives who would love to come in and talk to people about policy. I think that'd be really good for establishing our political identities because we do it together, not in a household, but as a class, and we get to challenge each other from an early age and become acquainted with opposing political opinions and have the ability to challenge them and be challenged ourselves. That also ties into echo chambers and alleviating that because now all of a sudden, from the onset, you're exposed to ideas that you would never consider.
I think from a civic standpoint, as much as we talk about people who feel hopeless and that their vote doesn't matter, I think something that young people really need to consider and look at is how far the United States has come in such a short time. When you talk about segregation or something like that in history class, sometimes it doesn't always hit home as to how soon and how relative to now that was. I mean, I don't think kids understand that just in the last 50 years how much race relations and everything has changed in the U.S. And we talk about Arab Americans or even Japanese Americans during World War II. There's just so much that we don't talk about, and a lot of it is gruesome history that we don't like to share in class, in the classroom setting. But I think it's important to look at where we are now relative to what happened back then, because there are so many kids now who, if they were born 50, 60 years ago, lives would have been completely different. Their whole political activism would have been unthought of. And I think that something we need to consider is looking at how far we've come and seeing that same change, and just it's amazing to me that that same change could happen now, and that moving forward we could be a totally different country in 30, 40, 50 years, and it's something that we don't even seem to think it's possible just because our vote feels hopeless. And I just think that history of it and the history of legislation and just the most important legislation that's affected minorities and other races, it's just important to look at and see that while it's better now, that we're not all the way there yet, and the road doesn't end here. And I think that there's so much more potential for our country, and I think that that's really important, and looking at the history would just really help solidify that understanding in young people.
Thank you. One thing that I'm hearing a lot, we keep hearing about polarization and echo chambers. So I just have to ask this question, and other people can respond as well if you would like to, is when we talk about echo chambers and polarization, I have to bring up political correctness. So we're constantly pushing PC or political correctness, which, it has its pros and it has its cons, and then there's like the middle section. And what I'm noticing, though I understand why we want political correctness, I also feel like you're destroying conversation and we're not getting to the point. How are we, because 1 minute we're like, you can't say this, but then at the same time, we're never addressing why this person believes this, why they think it's okay, and then we're not like taking the time to inform each other and educate. But then on the other side, people have also, to me, have a right to say, I'm not going to put up with you disrespecting me. So that's another thing, It's like we get racism. Some of us at least understand that racism is still here and hasn't really gone anywhere. And then other people are like, well, I see things. I don't see color, and it's like to that other person who's living every day being discriminated against and marginalized. And I'm not going to put that. How do I say this? I'm not going to put that pressure or that responsibility on that person to go around educating the other person. So it's like, where do we draw the line? Where do we say you deserve agency, support, and self-care, and you shouldn't have to put up with that? So that question is like, anybody who wants to respond to that.
Yeah, so I think that it's my personal view that there's a way that we can talk about things and be politically correct at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of the people that have attacked political correctness, notably on a certain side of the aisle, what they do is they attack political correctness not because they're unable to communicate with PC, but because it ties into ego. Because we don't want to talk about things in a way that we haven't talked about things before. But I mean, it's perfectly okay if I'm in a one-on-one discussion, if someone says, I don't want to use certain language, I feel like that's offensive to me, that's an easy fix. I mean, I think it's just about a commitment to open discourse that would really, really fix that. And I think PC's become another thing that has become attached to the egos of politicians and to the egos of a lot of people when they're discussing politics. That's largely unnecessary. I mean, it's not like, English is a vast language. There are multiple ways of talking about something. We can afford to sacrifice certain words and certain phrases if they are at the expense of another individual. It's not something that is so ingrained in our ego that we're unwilling to shed, or at least I'm not, and I know you guys are. So I just think it's about committing to open discourse that would definitely remove the stigma of PC. It's just an overblown political move that people use to try and prevent open discourse.
Thank you.
I think as far as political correctness goes, when you're hiding how you really feel and saying that it's because you want to be politically correct, I feel like that when you're looking at people, whether they be candidates, it's a little bit self-selecting in the sense that, or at least I hope that people who forego political correctness for the wrong reasons or choose to be politically correct for the wrong reasons to hide how they actually feel because they feel like what they want to say is something that's unelectable, or they'll become an unelectable person if they go one way or the other. That when you hide yourself from your constituents, and you hide as a politician how you really feel and say it's for the sake of political correctness, that you lose some of your genuineness, especially when you're talking to people. I feel like making politics personal, having that discourse, kind of removes some of the gray area between that, because it's harder for you to be the person you are on TV, or be fake, or hide behind policy, or keep political correctness when you're one-on-one with someone. I think, like Devin said, encouraging open discourse is just something that would solve most of it.
Thank you.
I mean, I would say that political correctness, in the sense that we're talking about certain language being barred, you can still commit to open discourse having that. I don't think that you can be genuine without using a specific phraseology. Like, you can convey your ideas in a certain way without offending someone, and we should be seeking to protect those who might be offended or marginalized because they see the world in a different way. And because we have the ability to communicate without using such phraseology that would discriminate, then we can do that while being committed to open discourse. I don't know if I was not clear about that.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add?
Away from that for a minute, what are the young people saying about rights that they're totally used to being threatened to be taken away?
Do you have anything, like a specific example?
Like abortion rights,
Literacy.
women
Being taught how to read in the state of Michigan.
Clean water.
rights.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the young people saying about that?
So I mean, amongst our friend group, we've been pretty active in researching the new Supreme Court, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in his stance on the issue. We're, at least, I can't speak for my entire generation, but with the close friends of mine, we've been getting ready to gear up to challenge the confirmation, or research the confirmation, and have our own opinion on it. So we've been engaging with the politics behind the suppression of LGBTQ rights and abortion rights. We're very active in advocating for the right of a woman to choose, and for LGBTQ rights. So we're taking charge by being educated and by understanding how we can influence the decision. It's my personal belief that Brett Kavanaugh won't go against the judicial precedent set by Roe v. Wade. So I mean, I'm not too frightened about that. But if he were to go against it, I'm sure that my friends would be ready to challenge him or whatever way we could.
But how could you challenge him if he's already on the Supreme Court?
I mean, we can. He has a constituency. He's not acting independently. He's interpreting the Constitution, but he also has to answer to the American public. He's not going to make a decision that would tank his approval rating. He still is subject to American oversight. So if there's a huge grassroots movement and all the people are saying, we want Roe v. Wade, we could pass a constitutional amendment to undermine the Supreme Court ruling. But again, I don't think Brett Kavanaugh will, because John Roberts would have to go against precedent, which I don't think he will, because he believes in judicial restraint.
And your group of friends are talking exactly the same way?
Well, something that I've seen outside of, not necessarily a group of friends, but people who choose not to educate themselves on certain policy, I usually find it that it doesn't relate to me, so I don't need to be educated on it. And my opinions on it, either I feel strongly about it, or it doesn't. So, for example, I see a lot of young men, and they have a very strong opinion on abortion, whether it be rooted in religion or their family beliefs, or they say that, well, my vote on it doesn't really matter. I'm not a woman. It doesn't affect me. Leave it be. Or whether it be LGBTQ rights. Some people that I know, most people actually, have never been exposed to having to deal with a transgender person, for example, trying to use a bathroom. So they hear that on the news and they say, well, that doesn't really apply to me. I don't have an opinion on it, unless they do, and that's rooted in some of their beliefs. And I think that comes down to the people who want to be educated about something will be educated about something. The people who want to have a strong belief about something, whether it be rooted in their personal beliefs or what research they've done, they will. But at the end of the day, enough young people feel like this doesn't matter to me because I'm not directly involved in it, and they won't. And I think that there's just so much of a diversity, and I don't think it's changed because of the 2016 election. I think that it's something that's just been there, and I don't know, for as long as I can see in the future, it will continue to be like that.
Thank you again for all the questions and the feedback, and everyone who has been participating, and those who are here with us and listening. Do you have
Yeah, you can take your time.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, real quick, I just wanted to say, like, going off of that, how do we move to realizing any injustice is a problem and we can't just sit around, well, this involves me and I don't care, it's not my group or it's not my, like, how do we kind of, because I get that all the time, like, even with my own family and friends, it's like, well, this doesn't really concern me, and, you know, we're sitting up here trying to get food and y'all worried about going to the bathroom. We can't even, you know, those are like some of the responses I'm getting, and it's like, okay, but how do we bridge that gap? What are some tools, steps, ways that we can really start advocating on the behalf of everybody having not only equality, but equity and, you know, fair representation? That's my opinion.
So Martin Luther King said, "An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So I think that this definitely ties into our curriculum in schools and how to commit to open discourse. I think that I don't know a single person who has such bigoted beliefs that could stand face to face with someone and tell them that I don't believe that you have the right to do this. I know that I'm speaking in kind of general terms, but I mean I think there's something beautiful in communicating individually one-on-one with someone who is diametrically opposed to you. And I think that that's something that we do not have. I think that there are a lot of people using gay marriage, for example. I do not think that a bigoted person is capable of standing face to face with someone who let's say a person who doesn't believe in gay marriage. I don't think that they can stand face to face with someone who is gay and tell them that they don't believe that they can get married. I think that that's something that is extremely difficult to do and that they won't do, purely because they understand that they know that they can say that they don't want this person to be married or an issue of the sort, but to look someone in the eye and say that is something extremely difficult, even for someone who's been raised in an echo chamber, because they have to address this latent homophobia head on. And so I think that if we foster an individual one-on-one relationship with people who are diametrically opposed, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more level. And then people who have been raised in an echo chamber and led to believe things a certain way will suddenly have their beliefs challenged, and it will be an awakening. Because I know I'm speaking in general terms, which is a little difficult to follow, I apologize. But I seriously believe that open discourse and an individual discussion on a policy issue can change someone's life. And then I think that, especially in the case of the transgender bathrooms, I don't know one person who does not support transgender bathrooms that has talked to a transgender person, or the other way. I think that sustained open discourse necessarily cuts down barriers between people, and especially on the individual level. I think that's something that we need to commit to, because that's the only way that we can show everyone how we feel. That's the only way we can truly reach another person, is by talking to them individually, one-on-one. And that also, again, ties into open discourse and curriculum in schools.
Thank you.
I had an interesting experience this summer where I witnessed a young gentleman become friends with someone he never met before, and over the course of a week, we became very close, really good friends, and about 5 or 6 days into them first meeting each other, the other one revealed that he was gay. And the first younger gentleman I'm speaking about was raised in kind of a sheltered community, very close. His family had always kind of scorned the LGBT community, just raised very close-minded, and it was so eye-opening for him, he told me, getting to know somebody and realizing that here's a person and they're just as human as I am, another person the same age as me, do the same things for fun, watch the same movies, play the same video games, and just finding out after the fact so much later that this person that he just grown to love and be best friends with was homosexual, and it was just eye-opening for him. He'd never considered the fact that someone could be so similar to him in all these different ways, but also be gay. And I think, like you're saying, Devin, that just that open discourse and just being able to say, yeah, I just wanted you to know, like, I'm free to say some things, but I'm the same person that you're talking about that you don't believe has the right to do this or the right to do this, and that I am this person that you've made it so political, and that you've just politicized entire issue, but I'm the embodiment of that. And for him, someone so close-minded, for him to be eye-open like that gave me such a hope that just discourse, being able to talk to people and realize the humanity of people beyond politics. I was just very empowered by that, and I think that goes right back to what you're saying. And there's just so much more of a humanity that I don't think people understand behind some of these issues. And I think that realizing that, and realizing that even though this issue doesn't concern me, it concerns someone, and that person is a human, and that person has rights, and that person is similar to me, and that person might be in my own community. And again, I think just it's realizing the humanity behind the people who are the issues, and realizing that politics isn't just issues or legislation, that it affects people directly. And I witnessed so much of that when we had the water crisis here. Support pouring in from all over the country, people who weren't afflicted by this but can understand that if this happened in my own city, I would want to hold my government officials accountable, or I would want to know or be reassured that my water is safe. And again, I think it all just boils down to the raw humanity behind the people who are involved in politics.
Thank you. I want to make sure that Keyshawn's perspective is heard.
So first, I like to congratulate you guys on your event in University of Chicago. It was like really awesome college.
Thank you.
And like, just, you know, you guys are great. But something that I wanted to kind of address was the policy reform. I really love that you guys are like really advocates for policy reform and equal opportunities for education. But something that I believe, like you were talking about open discourse, something that I believe is, you know, privatize real allocation of funds for, you know, education and needs of like charter schools and different things like that, that leads to the destruction of public schools. I attend Southwestern, so like we go, well, last year, we went to a school like a mile away from each other, and if you looked at the differences between our schools, because of things like this, because of, like you said, echo chambers. Echo chambers have created these great divisions because of socioeconomic positions that these two schools hold. So to kind of hear you say equal opportunity and then followed by school of choice is kind of 50-50.
Yeah, so when I was referring to school choice, I was talking about the school choice system that I'm advocating for basically establishes a marketplace for education that would incentivize ingenuity in the school system and give people equal opportunity to schooling. So it would effectively destroy the gap between Southwestern and Powers in terms of education like you're talking about by creating an artificial demand that would enfranchise people of lower socioeconomic status. So that would create a level playing field for education by allowing people who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend a school like Powers, if that's what your goal is, to do so. So it would effectively destroy the role of original socioeconomic status in education by creating a level playing field through the creation and subsidization of an artificial demand by school vouchers.
So what would be like an example of this actually working? So, what would be
Well,
the
this is just a
template?
policy that I've been developing personally. There is no real precedent for it because it hasn't existed. It's only been in theory. So, I mean, I can't give you a specific example, but I can detail the policy. If you have any questions about it, I'm happy to answer.
Also going back to the whole perception issue, what is your opinion about that whole case with the Supreme Court where that baker refused to bake a cake for the gay couple, and then his right to refuse them was upheld by the Supreme Court? What are your opinions and opinions of maybe other kids your age when this topic may have been discussed?
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's quite a difficult question. I think that ties into the relationship that I found to be at the heart of almost every public policy, which is that of economic freedom versus equality, and political freedom and equality. And so I think that in that case of the baker chose to refuse the cake to a gay couple. Those of you who don't know, on the basis that they were gay, and the cake included a graphic of them kissing, I think, I'm not sure. But I mean, I think that in our society, it's a tough question because it challenges our beliefs on freedom and our beliefs on equality. So for me personally, if you want my personal opinion, I think that we should set our preconceptions and commit to open discourse, as I've said 1,000 times. But I think that as it relates to this case, we should be able to, if I was the baker, of course I would make the cake. Of course. I can't force the baker to make the cake personally. If we pass policy, I think that the way we fix that problem is through discourse. So there's always going to be a group of people calling for change in policy, a change in government that would enable, that would force the baker to make the cake. I think that I can understand that. But I think the way to truly solve the problem is through discourse and through discussion and through the rigging of echo chambers, as I've rattled off, because that's truly what addresses the problem itself, which is the conflict between someone's personal religion and the state law that allows for gay marriage. So again, I can't personally force the baker to make the cake. I can understand people who call for the government to take action and to interpret it as something that he must do. But I still think that that's not a fix of the problem. It's just you just cast the responsibility away.
As far as my opinions are concerned, I just like to say that I don't know if I'm educated enough to speak on the logic behind the courts interpreting free speech or anything, but what I believe is just that if you can't separate yourself and your religious beliefs for something on that small of a level, which is just baking a cake, right, and it doesn't put you in any kind of, you're not being an accomplice to anything that you don't believe in, you're not being forced to be a part of something that you don't believe in the sense that you're simply baking a cake and it's just an artifact, right? And I feel like if you can't separate yourself from that, then that's just an issue in and of itself, but that's just my personal belief, and like I said, I don't think I personally couldn't force the baker to make the cake, and I can't force him to shut down his business, so.
And right before I get to Professor McIntyre, I just wanted to throw that in when we're talking about economic freedom is, again, marginalized, disenfranchised communities and groups of people historically do not have economic freedom because, in my opinion, if we truly had economic freedom, you don't want to make the cake, okay, whatever. We're going to go to someone who is going to make the cake, but however, do we have a lot of LGBTQ plus bakers? Do we have a lot of people of color bakers? Do they get the same loans? So that's where it's like, yes, we want freedom and choice, but we also have this issue where systemically and historically we've disenfranchised entire groups of people. So.
And we don't have economic freedom.
No.
Come on.
We don't.
You cannot
They're not
have child prostitution. You cannot sell drugs. There are certain limitations to what the market can bear. So if this person is going to refuse based on prejudice and discrimination and violating the law, and he can't, separate that, then he needs to go out of business. I mean, that's just personally or whatever. But I want to say, I think it's commendable, and I agree with you in theory about this discourse. Like, yes, I agree. I'm a teacher, obviously. I believe in discourse, and I think that that's a way in the long run. But I've had somebody who I know very, very well, who I've been to their wedding, look me in the eye and tell me that I'm going to hell because I'm queer. And this is somebody who respects me, who knows me personally, and yet can still say to my face, I've been spit on by people who know me. We've had discourse, and I think the baker with the cake actually had discourse with the couple that was ordering the cake. So in theory, yes, I would love to have these spaces, these public spaces opened up where we can have discourse, but then the onus is on, I don't want to say the victim, but the onus is on, as usual, the person of color, the queer woman, the person who has to take responsibility for that discourse to try to correct it. And I think a lot of, I know the Black community is sick and tired of having to educate white people, with decent, just basic respect and decency. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of emotional labor. That's a lot of racial labor, and it already exists. So, like I said, in theory, I get it. That's I agree with you, but in practice, it's not happening. Again, it puts a lot of the work, the emotional labor, the physical labor on people who are underrepresented. And, you know, like, I'm tired of being spit on. I'm tired of having to defend myself. I'm tired of having to explain to everybody, you know, things over and over and over again. You know, and I'm a very privileged white middle-class woman, so I mean, I don't even have to deal with a lot of things that other people have to deal with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So to address your
Thank
first
you.
point about economic freedom, I mean, we have economic freedom. The notion that we don't have economic freedom.
No, you and I are going to disagree.
Well, I mean-
just full disclosure, they were also, you were in my sociology class, and
Yeah.
both of them in my sociology class. So we've had a lot of discourse. And I am so proud of you. You guys are amazing. And eventually,
love
one of the
that we're
questions I
all
want to
here.
ask you is why you weren't more engaged in my class. And you're sitting up here talking about
They're up here giving lectures right
Well,
now. you know.
to finish my point, though,
parents, especially with me, it'll be.
For the record, your class was at 8 in the morning, and
I understand.
But to address the point about economic freedom, you brought up child prostitution. So the economy works with.
Or any prostitution.
Well, yeah. So there are obviously some professions that we can engage in, but the economic freedom isn't suppressed, and it's not non-existent because there are limitations on what kind of exchanges you can enter into. Because speaking with economic theory, there's a marketplace that the government backs to support contracts and voluntary exchanges that make up the transactions that compose the economy. So because the marketplace is set in a certain way where we can't have child prostitution, it doesn't limit or suppress the right of an individual to enter into a voluntary exchange. That only changes the way voluntary exchanges can be entered into.
Yeah, but I'm so disappointed that you're going into economics. It's like only one subsection of capitalism, and you know how I feel about capitalism, and it makes me a little bit more critical.
You're really
I mean, Chicago School of Economics,
Hey,
we
all right,
invented
I-
classical liberalism. But,
You know how I feel about liberalism too. I'm totally against it. 'Cause it's,
We'll
because
talk.
of- okay.
Yes,
We'll talk.
we'll
But
talk.
also on the point of getting back to the baker. So there's a huge problem when we turn to the state to coerce someone into doing something. That's a blatant violation of freedom. So then, like I said, it turns into economic freedom versus economic equality. And that is a huge, huge problem when someone is refusing an individual a product on the basis of their race or on the basis of their sexuality. It is also a huge, huge problem if the state coerces someone into doing something. And when I talk about open discourse, and you said it's failed, it's because we haven't had open
But a
discourse.
fine isn't coercion. A
What?
fine, like you can fine somebody. Like that's not.
Well, so that's a specific policy, but then after the fine, would they still have to make the cake? Well, because the problem still hasn't been addressed. The only way you can address a problem like that is through discourse, which is obviously not happening. The discourse you brought up was just the bickering that went on between the baker and the
But what else?
consumer. So there's discourse that can happen at a much earlier level. Because these are two adults arguing, nothing's going to change between them after they've already been socialized. But if the discourse begins at a younger age, when people are still open to new ideas, then all of a sudden that situation doesn't happen at all. Because there's some reconciling of the two opposing people. And now one person can say, I was raised in a Catholic church. I do not believe in gay marriage myself, but I have a friend who is gay. And they've been my friend all my life, and we've had discussions about this. And I will gladly disagree with my church to support this person.
Where's that space going to be? And I'm sorry
Yeah.
to keep interrupting. Where's that space going to be? And just as a point of example, you went to Powers.
Yeah.
And you had a class with me at 8 in the morning.
Mhm.
That DEEP program, they refused to have those same classes for his
Yeah,
school
at Southwestern,
in Southwestern.
next door,
They
literally.
did not allow them to the Flint Public Schools, and it was
That's
the University of Michigan Flint having a dual enrollment program, and it serviced your school but not his. So where we would have that discourse to actually talk about that stuff, it was completely not available to Kishon.
So that discourse isn't limited to sociology. That's what I've been trying to say with open discourse in civics especially. Every school has a required civics class. if we can put that kind of discussion time, that kind of discourse in the civics class where I think it should belong, not in sociology, that's a little too esoteric for learning how to discourse on discoursing. But so I think that in a civics class, which every student has to take, if you have discourse, the quality of discourse is still the same. You still learn from each other. And so that discourse doesn't need to happen in a dual enrolled college class. That goes against what I'm trying to say. It should happen in a basic civics class that everyone has to take.
A civics class?
Yeah.
Did you have a government class?
I mean, in terms of like the class offered by my school, yes, but
But
again,
how
like
it's
you said,
ran.
there's often issues that you don't want to discuss in class, issues that
And you
that
have to go
won't be
through
addressed.
a metal detector to get to that class, and 13 of those classes,
And
you
you have
didn't have a
books.
teacher
Yeah.
last year, and
Teachers
everyone
are
was
being
put
paid
into the
for.
auditorium. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
just not.
Yeah, but
And how old are those school books? Like,
Yeah, and that's
it's
what I'm
not
saying,
even-
because,
well, I think we're getting away from the discourse part of it. I still think that.
well, how do,
So my class didn't personally have the kind of discourse that I would have liked. I had to seek that out for myself. So it's not like we had the discourse, that we have the solution, that we have the answer. But it's not something that socioeconomic status can tie down. Discourse can happen between any two people, between Jeff Bezos and the guy walking down the street. As long as they talk, that's all you need. You don't need anything else but the willingness to discuss. And so if we can have that in class and in a curriculum, it doesn't matter what textbook you have. I mean, that's definitely important, don't get me wrong. We definitely need to improve textbooks in a lot of rural schools. But to discourse, it's free, and it's impactful and it's powerful. And you can only learn something fully by doing something. So having the opportunity to discourse in a school is something that all schools should have. And that isn't tied down to socioeconomic status. I didn't have discourse in the way that I would have liked at my school that I pay a lot of money to go to. He didn't have discourse in his school. We can solve both of those problems without challenging, without using socioeconomic status as a bullet.
I don't know, you have 2 doctors for parents, and you've got discourse in the home.
see, and that's
Well,
the thing, how do we
my
facilitate those conversations?
Well,
How do we
personally,
get it
my
going?
parents had never talked to me about politics.
You said they did.
No, they did. My parents never once talked to me about politics. It was interesting, and I'm thankful for that. What's that?
They talk to you about issues, and that's political. They talk to you about.
There's some socialization, but I did not agree with my parents on politics. I still do not agree with my parents on politics. We have vastly different views. So,
That's an amazing education in and of itself.
but that's not something that I was handed. Like my parents never handed me this supposed view and said, "This is yours. You can oppose us."
But that's part of your education.
Yes.
That's so free.
I don't think
So,
so because I don't.
so we can move
I don't
on
think you have
and get to
any-
the next one. I appreciate this.
Yeah.
You know, I taught at a Montessori school in Evanston, Illinois for 25 years. And and the reason I'm saying that is because it was on the North Shore and it was very affluent. And many of those students had a lot of opportunities that other kids just didn't have. And like, when I hear you talk about having discourse, I can imagine the classrooms in multi-age classroom settings. And I saw what you're talking about. But I also know that parents paid a hefty tuition for those children to have the discord that you're talking about. And in theory, I believe that, yeah, you know, it can work. But I also believe that if you're not thinking about, and I think this kind of addresses what you're talking about, like you're kind of focused in on like the human
Yeah.
aspect and the justice. But
Humanity.
I think when you're looking at other communities and neighborhoods where some children go home and they're worried about
Food.
is
You know.
food, is dad gonna be drunk tonight? Somebody gonna come into my room tonight? Your head is filled with a lot of other things
You're
than
on survival.
and it's surviving. So unless you have that experience, it's hard to incorporate that. And I think that's just kind of to your point,
Yeah. Because you're saying it's free, and it's not though. 'cause
Well,
some
right,
people have
because-
jobs and the transportation.
because what's
issues.
taking like paying rent in your head? Like every thought we have you know.
Well, I don't think a
somebody's
child
paying
should
for
be.
it.
I don't think a child should be worried about paying rent or.
No,
What?
I don't mean real
Yeah,
life. I just
so-
mean like, what preoccupies your thoughts? Like children who don't have breakfast and they go to school and they're hungry and they can't focus. I'm with you. I think I love what you're saying, but I also agree with what you're saying. You know, and it's only time and experience. It's like enough with the discourse. You're fine because it's just, you know, you're wrong.
So,
I mean,
my
oh, sorry.
question, no, thank you everyone. My question is now, how can we bridge the gap between discourse, reality, and making sure people's basic necessities and needs are being met so we can facilitate the discourse that you're talking about and that you've seen and you've done?
I think a lot of us are idealistic in our approaches to a lot of things, but realistically, it's not something that you can ever really grasp. In an example I could use, I think bringing about the issue of slavery and the journey that African American people have taken in this country, you know, only after really, even after slavery was abolished, 1865, or 1863 when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, it took, 100 years till blacks were actually able to vote, and many still held the belief that blacks weren't able to vote. They weren't ever really educated enough to vote. It was only after, you know, the government passed laws and different things that said, no, you can't discriminate against somebody by the basis of their race or color. So only after that did real progress start to show to where we are now. Even now we still face those those same things, but it has taken like a different mask. You know, it's taken the role of economics. It's taken the role of poor equals person of color, and those person of colors are barred from a lot of things because they're poor, because of their socioeconomic status that they haven't been able to build upon because of years of prolific racism and institutionalized marginalization. So when you talk about like the idea that discourse is like just the answer or the like approach to go for, like at first, it's not realistic. I mean, you know, you really can't tell a bigoted person to talk it out because they're really going to have those same, you know, thoughts about that person that will just keep them away from whatever they want in life.
So I want to preface by saying that I in no way can ever understand the kind of troubles that someone who has been the victim of institutionalized prejudice will ever go through. That's something that I haven't understood. I've been raised in a very privileged family, and I'm very thankful for that. But discourse does more than just, it's more than just talking. So let me give an example. So back in, after the war, when the Klan was resurging, there was a group of people that, I read this in a book by Stephen Levitt. It's called Freakonomics. It's about econometrics. So when the Klan was resurging, there was this deep fear of the Klan, and this was like widely held in society. And so what happened was there was this one person who was really against it. He was this white guy, Stetson. He was the grandson of the guy who started the Stetson cowboy hats. So he was extremely against this, and he said he was willing to stand up to the Klan, and that was something that everyone was afraid of because it was secret, because no one really understood the Klan, because it was this secret society that had these secret words and this phraseology, and it was scary. And so what this guy did was he shined a light on it. So what happened was he infiltrated the Klan, and then he got they used specific phraseology, like they put a K in front of specific words to make it secret language, and they used a lot of other tactics to kind of induce fear amongst the masses. So what he did was he infiltrated that, popularized the lingo, exposed the meeting sites, so that everyone kind of saw this thing for what it was. And the Klan enrollment plummeted, and it has since never recovered. And so all he did was show this thing for what it was, to bridge the gap between the Klan and the masses, to show people what the Klan was and how weak it truly was and how it relied on fear to have this effect. I mean, even after the war, when the Klan was at its biggest, the crimes committed by the Klan were astronomically lower because people had begun discoursing on this and because it became bastardized to be a Klan member in public. Even though the number of Klan people had increased, their crimes didn't because of the discourse. And then when the light was shone on the Klan, the numbers dropped. The Klan plummeted, it went bankrupt. David Duke began crowdfunding and eventually was sent to jail for fraud. So the discourse is powerful because it unites the society. It's not just talk. And believe me, I know that talk is cheap. I know that a lot of times we may talk about an issue and things don't happen. I know public policy is a great way to change the culture and change the way people are thinking. But unless we can talk about these issues and convince people using logic and reason, then something will still be there that we can't just change by masking and covering it and using public policy to coerce people. We need to reach logical conclusions in discourse. That is how we change our opinions. If I don't feel enfranchised to say something, I still believe something that's bigoted, then that's still bad. Because that's at the root of institutionalized racism. Is the secrecy behind it. So if we can talk about institutionalized racism, if we can shine a light on it, then that's when it can disappear. That's when we can do something about it. That's how we do something about it. That's my belief.
I personally think that as much as we talk about discourse, and I believe that we have been shining a light, at least to some extent, on issues like institutionalized racism, and to a certain extent, we want to believe that just talking about it or shining a light on it, making it known, will change it, but there's certain people who won't budge on how they feel, and I wish that I could tell you that I believe with all my heart that discourse is the end-all be-all answer to solving our problems. But I feel like that's just one avenue. And again, what I believe when I base my politics and a lot of what I believe in my life on is realizing the humanity of the people sitting next to you and the people across the world from you. And if discourse is the avenue that would lead everyone to understand that, then I would be right there with it. And I hope it could be. But from what I've observed, realistically, I agree with you where I think that to a certain extent, it won't work all the way. And I wish I could tell you that I knew what that avenue will be that will lead us to realizing each other's humanity. And I wish I had an answer, but I don't. And I personally think that just using your words might not change the world, but we're not going to know what it's going to do until we open our mouths, right? So if we're going to talk with each other, we're going to have discourse, great. But to a certain extent, if it's not working, we have to realize that we can't just wait around for it to work. Or like we were talking about earlier, we can't wait for racism to die out because we think that it only exists within the older generations. We can't count on a whole new generation or something that we're totally oblivious to right now we can't understand to just count out racism, count out our problems. I think that more than just shining the light on an issue or more than just discourse is seeing that the issues aren't just what they are in the news and that there are people affected and there are families that are involved. And everything that we're talking about, I think there will always be limiting factors on discourse, right? But you talk about the deep class. You didn't have the opportunity to take it because of the program. Through Powers, actually, we weren't offered sociology. That's something that going to that school, they wouldn't have believed in many of the things that Professor McIntyre taught us, and that's not something they would have done. We found an avenue to take sociology through the deep program through a couple other public schools. I think it was Goodrich and Byron and Clyde.
And here, and Powers actually did fire an African-American professor for talking about lynching in Powers. So, I mean, there's all sorts of...
He was a Powers professor.
No, I was actually through deep. But,
right, no, that was through deep in the, yeah.
But the reason, just to clarify on that, the reason that Powers had the teachers fired is because the kids were uncomfortable with how they were being referred to.
Yeah, we can't pin that on the administration itself. The teacher was according to my friends, he or she, I don't remember the gender, but there was some incompetency and some disconnect between the students.
Students I know, good people, said that they were referred to in derogatory terms, and whether it was to show some kind of socioeconomic gap or whatever it may be in whatever the class was. I can't speak for the administration or why they fired them, but from what I heard, just to clarify on record, it wasn't because talked about
That's
lynching.
absolutely crazy, though, that student complaints can get a professor fired.
Well, the professor was not hired by Powers. They
No, it was hired from the University of Michigan.
Yes.
So they got a University of Michigan professor fired
So I mean,
because of what they said in a high school, in a private high school classroom.
I would say that there should definitely be accountability from professors through the students to decide whether or not the teacher is competent. And especially if they're being referred to in derogatory terms and they don't feel that they're learning in a safe environment, of course they have right to take action against the teacher. I don't know if he should
Do
have
you
gotten
think
fired.
all students should have that? Because that's the next question. 'Cause we're in Flint schools and we got some trashy teachers.
I
that
think
say
that all students,
can be there for
well, it doesn't
decades.
matter, should be able to evaluate and hold accountable their teachers.
I don't think it
That's
matters if
common
it's,
sense.
a professor or, if it's a baker or anyone, if there's enough people feeling like they're being referred to in a derogatory term in some professional manner, whether it be a teacher in a classroom or a restaurant owner in their own restaurant, I feel like there's some degree of holding the person accountable.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
what's
and they
right.
didn't get,
Oh my God.
they didn't fire him. I mean, they just said that we do not feel like we would like to be, that we're being taught in a safe environment and we would not like to be taught like this. And then
The
that can end
university's
there.
decision was-
That's the university's decision. That's not the student's fault.
You know, what you said was from the voice of privilege though. And it's to be expected, because your parents sent you to a private school, so you would be sheltered. They want that for you, and you weren't being sheltered, and so the logical consequence was the person who made you feel threatened was removed.
Oh, well, this wasn't us
This wasn't us.
personally.
No, but student body.
For sure.
Student body. But as to what you were saying, you cannot, you were right on the cusp of it. You cannot talk to somebody with a bias, a bigotry, unless they're willing to speak and listen to a voice of reason. And by virtue of the fact that they're so bigoted, they probably don't possess that reasoning.
Well, I mean,
So the reality is discourse is good if you can get a person to speak from a foundation of knowledge and a foundation of sharing. Now, the problem is, not all people are created equal. And what we've talked about here, we've screwed on, is that you can't even be fundamentally equal if you don't feel safe. If you don't feel
That's wrong.
secure. And I think that's the point that people are trying to say, is that there is a population that is not safe, doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel secure. And until they have that sense that they are on somewhat of a level playing, it's the same as a child with special needs in a school. You've had exposure to that. And the IDEA says, because this child has a special need, we need to make this accommodation to rise them up to closer to where his peer groups are. Until we do that with all people. Now, that's not to say everyone should have a handout, but not everybody should have such a hard life.
Yeah.
And the reality is the society we have right now is so ruled by the 1% of the 1% that even the middle class is disappearing very quickly.
So-
And the
1%
people who are lower than the middle class don't have any privilege.
The 1% children should be able to get an African-American, Africana Studies professor fired.
okay, so just to clarify, one last thing. My class has been taught about lynching. I know that I have been taught about lynching. We have been taught about lynching. It was not lynching. That was the specific thing that got this person fired. And again, I haven't taken this class, but I've talked to my friends. But it is my personal belief, I understand that I'm coming from a position of privilege, but if I do not feel, if I'm being referred to in derogatory terms by a professor, I have the right to say that I am not going to take this class. I think it's kind of ridiculous if to assume that it was the talk about lynching by an Africana Studies professor that got him fired. I don't think that's true at all. I'm sorry. I know that some of my classmates might be bigoted in some of their views, but there are a lot of good people that I went to class with.
And I'm not even saying it's a sense of bigotry that did it, but a sense of discomfort, like you said, those students weren't feeling safe and secure in that environment.
So all students should have that right.
So in that instance,
But they
weren't
don't.
feeling
That's
Yeah, I
the
know, but
problem.
that's what we were for. That's what we were
hopefully
for.
with the
Say that,
discourse.
And imagine what your peers were going through, and imagine that weight is on you every
Breathe
day.
down.
Yeah, so I completely understand it. That's a huge problem. But
That's the point, so discourse is good, but people have to have a sense that they come into the discourse with some level of
If I might
so
put it
real
out
quick,
there.
discourse can only discourse can only allow us to understand one another. It can't change policy. I'm not saying that discourse should be
But
in
it's a
place
step.
of policy, but you need discourse. We need open discourse to enact the policy. The first step is understanding. The first step is understanding that I come from a position of privilege, and I have a right to not be taught by someone who is referring to me in a derogatory way when someone else may not have it right. So I need to talk to that person to understand that they are suffering from this predicament, and then we use policy to fix it. Discourse can't fix public policy. Just because I say something doesn't mean it exists. So I completely agree.
Open eyes, hearts, and ears.
Yeah, for sure. So discourse is about understanding people. And then once we have that understanding, we can work together to use policy to fix the kind of problems and to make the system equitable.
A question for the audience. How do you think this conversation would be flipped if we had a Caucasian professor giving a class about imperialism, if it were in Southwestern, a majority African American class, saying derogatory things towards the student body there?
Still be the teacher, but I mean, because we see this.
That's a problem. The point is that that's a problem.
I agree with that.
It's like
And
that's
so
the
I
sad
think my
part.
point is that conversation is
Yeah.
something I never hear. And I would totally believe you if you tell me that happens all the time. I think that coming from a point of privilege, it's one thing to say that this happened in our classroom, the students were in a position of privilege, had something done about it. I think that we're seeing that privilege simply through the fact that we'd never have heard this happen from a place like Southwestern. At least I haven't heard it happen. And like I said, I would agree with you that I believe it would happen all the time. And I believe that there's that disrespect and those derogatory mannerisms in the classroom from teachers towards a majority African American class. And I think the point of privilege exists in and of itself, that we don't hear about it from anywhere else except for
No,
some other
and
powers.
like, so students from Southwestern will get suspended for rolling their eyes.
Or
So if they
wearing
disagree
hoodies.
With like, so if you were to disagree with that professor who
Going to the
think is
bathroom without
talking to you
permission.
derogatory, if you were to react to that, you would be the one kicked out of the
Yeah,
class.
so that shouldn't happen. What I'm saying is that just because it happened in my school and the students were able to undermine that, doesn't mean that they're like bad people. I mean, that's a right that all students should have, the accountability for the professor. I'm saying that that's something that should happen at Southwestern. That's something that should happen at every school. If someone feels like they're not learning in a safe environment, that's a problem. And just because, I know it's sad that only people in positions of privilege are able to do something about it. But what they did about it isn't bad. That's what we're trying to address across the board.
And you know, so I
We're
said
only
this.
seeing
oh,
one side of that story, though.
Right, and that's what
What the
I
administration did to the professor was bad, so not the students.
Well, I just
Yeah.
think that the crazy thing is not that the professor was held accountable based on what the kid said. I think that the crazy thing is that the only reason he was held accountable is because of where this happened. Whether if it was at Powers or any position of privilege at all, I think that's the crazy thing. Not necessarily that the students had a right.
But why would that happen? It's because the people in power have created their own like world for them to live in, and only they can infiltrate and rule that world, and that rules the rest of our world. The people who have low socioeconomic statuses have to be represented by people with privilege and high economic statuses, because those are the people who are always selected to be of those representing bodies. So when you talk about, well, this would, the students will never have this privilege to, undermine education system that is not educating them. Do you know the average SAT score at Southwestern, the test that allows you to get into college and to expound on so many like life experiences and opportunities. It's something that's not focused on at Southwestern, and it's something that students of color, mostly at Southwestern, don't have the privilege to get. So, and it's because of the people who have disenfranchised them and the people that are in power and have that privilege. So I think the proposed real answer to that would be to remove those people of privilege who know nothing about representing anyone other than themselves to represent people of low socioeconomic status.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I agree with you 100%.
Get rid of the SAT, I mean, that's the
Yeah, I mean,
of system, so.
thank you all again. And we're not ending just yet, but just letting you know it is 7:30. We want to get everyone out by 8. And one of the things that we mentioned last week is that, or at least for me, my goal is to turn what today is a privilege into a basic human right tomorrow. The point is, every student, if they feel uncomfortable and unsafe, should have the right, the dignity to be able to say, hey, this person is doing this and they need to go. And that's like my big thing, is how do we turn today's privilege into tomorrow's basic human rights, where there is equity, there is accountability, there is real fair representation. Because again, thank you, Keyshawn, for bringing that up. I mean, even when we look at who we represent, who's our representatives, oftentimes, are they really from your community? Do they really know what you've been through and the struggles and the triumphs and the tribulations? Probably not. And then like even in marginalized communities, I've noticed the tokenism. They will pick the privileged black person who actually had a middle class or upper middle class socioeconomic status, and that is our state rep. That is our pastor. That is our, and it's like they do not represent the voices of the black community, but yet they're tokenized to be that person. And that's not just for the black community. That's for a lot of marginalized and disenfranchised communities, unfortunately. But yes.
Well, I think that brings us back to the question of the role of money in politics.
Yes.
And in elections and in campaigns. Why are we one of the most expensive countries to have a campaign and run for political office, and that lasts forever and ever? Most countries do not spend this kind of money in their elective process, as well as in campaigns. It's all about how many millions you can raise, and it's a small minority of people that are deciding what is good for the country as a whole, based on their economic contribution to campaigns.
So Devin, thank you so much, because I would love, because I know you're going into the
one of the fundamental things
Yeah.
that we need to address.
Yes, I agree.
Lead campaigns that last 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean,
That's true.
I know that campaign finance is something that should be regulated extremely. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. But also, there have been numerous econometric studies that have shown that the people that get elected because they're likable. It's not necessarily the money. I know the book I was talking to you about before, Freakonomics, Stephen Levitt, he won the John Biggs Clark Medal for being the best young economist under 40. He has proven that the money is allocated meritocratically, and the people, irrespective, if he did an econometric study where the candidates ran against themselves in previous years, and it proved that campaign finance isn't actually what we played up to be. But even still, I still think that despite that study, we should definitely make sure that contributions to campaigns are equitable. Everyone should have the same voice. If money is free speech, then everyone should have the same limit and everyone should have the same cap. Corporations can't spend millions of dollars in outside spending, or have, $300 billion or $300 million in dark money has been pumped into the election cycle in 2016. That's definitely a problem, because I think that just fuels special interests. And while that might not switch the vote, like the econometric study said, it still influences the political decisions. because money is good because it can create staying power in politics. So I think that definitely giving people the same voice by limiting the amount of money available in campaign spending is definitely something that we should be pursuing.
So Devin, can I just ask, what makes you so sure that the youth will not have their rights removed? And how do you bring about conversation with the young people today that says nothing is assured?
So I might just be so sure because I'm not going to let it happen. I'm going to consistently fight anyone who will try to strip me of my rights. That's just me. I'm prepared and I'm ready to discourse on it, to influence public policy, to do whatever I can to protect my rights and the rights of all my fellow citizens. That might just be wishful thinking, but I believe fully that I have the power to do that.
I just want to say, I think you're doing a great job moderating, and I think you guys are really doing a wonderful job. Like you're taking a lot, so thank you. But I want to, in relation to what you're saying, something that you said earlier about our history and like certain things that we're not that far away from. You know, we talk about this often. And people your age, 19, 20?
18.
18. Thank God, 18. Yeah, you know, I was just saying, how do you get young people to the polls? How do you get them to go vote? Because I would bet that a majority of 18-year-olds are not thinking how you're thinking. They're just, I was 18 once, I would never be thinking this stuff when I was 18. Everything like, how am I going to get a job to get a car? Where am I mean, you might be thinking those things too, but I was not politically aware at 18, but yet politics influenced my life. And I guess the question is, how do you really impress upon 18, 19-year-olds, like, your life is ruled by politics even if you don't think so.
Yeah, and that's,
Like, even if you are not aware of it, like, to say to a young woman who's 18, you're going to be sexually active, you should go get birth control. Well, there's women who really fought, like, the whole women's liberation movement. Like, that could be taken away little by little, like, and that's just one example, but I don't think young women realize that
Yeah.
because they've lived with it.
and that's that privilege like blinds you from seeing.
Right, and
like,
if you watch politics, see
Yeah.
like the strands that are coming undone,
And they do
like,
piece by
it's-
piece, and
well,
pretty soon
and
you
it's
have
little by
nothing.
little. It's chip, and I don't know that they're like. Is there a sense of urgency? And I understand like Catholic school and like I get all that, but I'm saying like the 18-year-olds at large, like they're like, yeah, I'm gonna vote, I'm gonna get out there. And I'm talking beyond your peer group, like your personal friends, like extend not even to the next level of friends, like your friends, but like those friends. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Your
Are
other
those
peer
like
groups
the friends
extend-
like who might be at the same party you're at, or
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
answer is the same as it's been for a while, and it's just that young people aren't at the polls. And I don't think that that's changing really, and as much as I hate my answer when you say what gets young people out and active in politics, as much as I hate my answer, it's when's the next tragedy going to happen, right? Whether it be school shootings right now, how long did it take for a movement to happen that was just centered around young people who were in schools? And I mean, that's something that I've seen and sometimes is a little hopeless. Is it just going to be, what's the next tragedy that's going to affect young people, whether it's going to be taking away birth control for the age group of young people who need it the most? Right now, it's terrible, right? School shootings, that's the thing that's getting us involved. I mean, maybe it's just because, like you said, are we victims of the politics behind it? Or is it really a problem that's rooted deeply in our society? And I think that is my answer right now, is that's what's been getting us motivated, is the tragedies that affect us.
So I'm gonna disagree with my brother here. I think that a lot more people have already been shown, millennials, to be voting. I mean, New York's 14th district, Ocasio-Cortez defeats Joe Crowley. Joe Crowley was the 4th ranking Democrat. He was talked about to replace Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, defeated in the Democratic primary by, I think, a 29-year-old bartender. That's ridiculous. That's never happened. While I don't personally share the same beliefs that Ocasio-Cortez has, it is, we'll
Yeah,
talk.
what-
We will talk.
We have, after you finish, we have one more question.
Yeah, so it has already been shown that people are voting out these establishment officials. Whether or not that's a good thing, that shows that people are voting. And I don't think we need to wait for tragedy. I do not and will not wait for tragedy. If I see someone talking about politics, I will walk up to them, no matter how awkward it is. I will talk to them because I think it's necessary. I'm going to push all my friends to push their friends to push their friends to vote. My friends are doing voter registrations. I'll do voter registrations. I'll get out there. If we as a community push millennials to vote, show them that their vote matters, and talk to them like they're adults, then they're going to understand the value of their vote. If they don't understand the value of their vote, then there's no value in voting. That's just irrational. Look, if we think about this economically, if something has value, then they're going to gravitate toward it. If we can show them that it has value, they'll gravitate toward it and they'll act on it. So enfranchising their vote, showing them that their voting matters, that's what gets millennials to elections, and it's been happening, and it will happen. I think that this midterm election, more millennials will vote than in any election ever before.
I just want to clarify, in no way, shape, or form did I say we need to wait for tragedy. I'm just saying it like it is, where I see it takes a tragedy for a generation, for this generation to get involved when it's something that has to hit them that close to home. I think that's sad.
New York's 14th, Beto O'Rourke in Texas.
Look at the 18-year-olds
Aruna
at
Miller-
large, though.
or
We're not
Aruna
talking about
Miller,
millennials.
All right,
the
so we're gonna, all
Arizona's
right,
4th district.
all right, we got one more right here.
I want to get back to the question about what are
Thank you.
most 18-year-olds doing? And my disclosure is I'm mother of the 2 speakers up here. As OBGYN, I will say that most 18-year-olds are not aware of what is at risk. My patient population of women coming in for birth control and all sorts of contraceptive and female health related needs are not aware of what is at stake.
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel that education and the inequity of education is paramount to the breakdown of our 18-year-old majority not being politically active. Because, and I'm not blaming them, but we need to fix the education so my patients coming in will understand that politics is affecting them daily, and that the opportunity for contraceptive and choice is being threatened on every level. And when you are struggling for basic needs every day, you cannot be involved in the political process in the same way. And economic equity is not, in our county, is not there. And I see it every single day in my patients. Today I had to give a patient $2 to get the medicine to stop her bleeding because of her socioeconomic and family problems today. If she wouldn't have told me she needed those $2, I would have never known. And then the whole visit that I squeezed her into to get. So as much as I love hearing my children talk, there is no way, unless you are part of that socioeconomic culture, and not that I'm, because my patients are discussing those problems with me, I'm aware of those barriers and politically how that plays out for women is, I'm distressed, but of course I'm older, and I feel for those patients, and when my patients complain about why they have to fill out this form or why this medicine, I'm like, all your politicians. I'm telling the 18-year-olds, but they have so much other stuff on their plate where the food, the job, and the rent, they can't even engage
People are
in that.
trying to
Would they even know?
survive.
Yeah, you don't know. Well, I give out 211 more than I give out any other number, right? So we're not even gonna get to that level,
Bless you.
you know. So I'm gonna encourage my children to go and, you know, talk to the generation of their friends that, or their age group that is not their friends. Because until you live in someone's shoes and know the daily problems, especially if both of them are interested in politics, they need to have, and I don't agree with the discourse. If you have a bigot who's angry, mean, he's gonna shoot the person who comes talk to them. We've seen that in Charlottesville and other places. So I agree with you, discourse in a way of showing policy and other things. But in our own county, we need to address basic needs, and every citizen needs to understand what the other citizen is going through. I think that would help us more and get back to the humanity that Nikhil's talking about.
And discourse leads to that understanding. I can't understand, like you understand what they're going through because you talk to them. Because they brought these issues to you, so you have a blessing of being able to relate to them and understand that. So I mean,
I'm challenging you to go to the communities in our neighborhood and talk to people about their basic needs and try and understand from their point of view the lack of economic equality and the lack of ability to discourse when you're in that setting.
for sure, and that's in and of itself discourse.
Yes.
That's my point.
But you have to expound on discourse is not just communication.
I think that's
It's
something,
actually living in those situations.
what you're talking about in living in other people's shoes, I find something interesting. I have heard for my entire life, to be honest, people are talking about humanity's 3 greatest problems going away, and that's plague, war, and famine. Over the course of human history, those have been our 3 biggest problems, and all I hear is that they're going away, and there's new problems on the horizon. But the only thing I can think about is that these 3 problems aren't going away for everybody. And while it's true that we don't have very many people dying of starvation anymore, especially in this country, whoa, it's going way down, lower than we've ever seen. Every year it decreases.
Have you been to South Sudan?
I know, and all I'm saying is it's not going away completely. But when you look, when you
Plague, we have Legionella coming back.
so listen,
Oh, yes,
listen
right
to
here
what
in
I'm
point.
saying. So when you say, I hear people on the news say these 3 basic problems are being eradicated, the only thing I can think about is in our very country, there are people who go to bed hungry, who don't have access to health care, right? That's ridiculous. And there's still violence. And you can't escape some of these things. And I think that it's ridiculous to say that humanity as a whole is moving on, when the only reason people are saying that is because we're leaving the people in the bottom bracket in the dust. And I think that that's where it comes in to being able to step in other people's shoes. Not that I agree when I hear people on the news tell me that the 3 biggest problems of humanity are going away, but I just think that the people, the politicians, whoever may be, people in a point of privilege need to understand that the only reason that these things are being said and that we're moving on is because we're forgetting about the lower half, or lower quartile, whatever it may be.
Great discussion.
Yes,
It could easily go on all
But we're
night. It
trying
is
to
a
leave
great
at 8. Yeah.
discussion, but we need to be in the parking lot by 8 o'clock, and we still have a few things to do.
Yes.
Thanks for coming out to McCree Theater. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.